As a young boy is abandoned at a wildlife reserve, a lion spots him sobbing alone on the path. This powerful predator locks eyes with the child and lets out a thunderous roar as it begins moving toward him. What happens next is astonishing. Mufasa, the lion, circles the child, whose cries grow louder. The early morning light reveals a deserted reserve. Mufasa, an enormous lion, paces back and forth, his mighty mane swaying in the morning breeze. Suddenly he halts, staring straight at the boy. The child's cheeks are flushed and swollen from crying as he gazes up at the lion, tears streaming down his face. With a fierce, teeth-baring roar, Mufasa raises his head, growling on the dusty path. The boy has no escape, and Mufasa roars again, this time with a glint of anger in his eyes as he stares intensely at the boy. Mufasa had been at the safari reserve since he was a young cub, after Ronan, a dedicated wildlife ranger, rescued him. Ronan had found Mufasa nestled against his mother's lifeless body, following a brutal attack by poachers. Too young to survive on his own, the cub was taken in by Ronan, who dedicated countless sleepless nights to feeding and nurturing him. Ronan, having started at the reserve at just 16, knew the importance of Mufasa learning to live with other lions before he became too accustomed to human interaction. The reserve hosted several lion prides, and Ronan hoped one of the experienced lionesses would adopt Mufasa. When the cub grew strong enough, Ronan placed him to a lioness who had recently had her third cub. She was both fiercely protective and exceptionally gentle, a balance Ronan believed would benefit Mufasa. Thankfully, the ranger's instincts were right, and the lioness welcomed Mufasa as her own. Ronan was thrilled with how things had turned out. Over the years, he watched Mufasa mature and eventually leave the pride. Like most male lions, Mufasa preferred a solitary life, and venturing out from the safety of the pride was a risky rite of passage. While Ronan knew Mufasa's chances for survival were higher within the reserve, he was aware that Mufasa could still run into a more dominant male and face a territorial or mating-related clash. The lion prides were one of Ronan's favorite parts of his work, yet he prioritized keeping a close watch on Mufasa's whereabouts. After rescuing him as a cub, Ronan felt a deep, personal investment in Mufasa's well-being. However, Mufasa was about to surprise the ranger in ways he'd never anticipated. Although he had a difficult start, Mufasa quickly adapted to life on the reserve. His courage, fierce spirit, and massive size soon made him one of the dominant males in the area. Ronan knew of many encounters where Mufasa emerged victorious. While the conflicts were intense, they were a natural part of life in the wild, and the reserve allowed the animals to live as they would outside, with the added protection from poachers. A veterinary team was also available if needed, which was crucial for safeguarding the reserve's many endangered species. While Ronan occasionally worried about Mufasa's safety, he knew the lion was in the best possible place. Despite the reserve's efforts to protect its residents from poachers, there had recently been issues with hunters slipping past the boundaries. Though no harm had come to any animals yet, it was now critical to reinforce the reserve's borders to keep poachers out. Through the weakened boundaries of the reserve, Mufasa would soon find himself face-to-face with a small, crying child. Waking from a deep sleep as the sun began to rise, Mufasa stirred. Lions were most active during the cooler parts of the day, and his stomach rumbled with hunger. The big cat stretched out lazily, preparing for the hunt. Being a lone lion made finding food challenging, yet Mufasa had learned to fend for himself well enough. As he stretched his large paws forward, a sound on the wind caught his attention, followed by a strangely familiar scent. Curious, he followed the scent down a dusty path, where he was startled to find a small child, sitting alone and crying. Mufasa licked his lips and began moving toward the child. Sitting in the middle of the road, the little boy, no older than 3, wore a blue jacket with the hood pulled up, his distressed cries echoing in the morning stillness. The lion maintained a safe distance, but started circling the boy, his gaze never leaving the child. As the boy's cries continued, Mufasa's demeanor shifted, his pacing becoming more agitated, almost as if he were torn about what to do next. Suddenly, Mufasa froze. Another scent filled the air, one that raised his hackles. Locking eyes with the boy, whose face was red and swollen from crying, Mufasa let out a ferocious roar, baring his teeth in a display of sheer power. The child was stunned into silence, his eyes wide with fear. Although anger flared in Mufasa's gaze, the boy noticed that the lion's focus was beyond him, not on him. Then, with startling speed, Mufasa lunged toward the boy, leaping over his head. A loud, heavy thumping made the little boy turn around, and he was startled to see another lion pinned beneath Mufasa, who stood over him, roaring and swiping with his massive claws. The two lions briefly clashed, but the second lion was quickly overpowered by Mufasa's strength. Meanwhile, Ronan was driving along the dirt road, unaware of the remarkable scene that lay ahead. As he rounded a corner, he spotted two lions locked in a struggle, a common sight in his line of work. But then, he noticed the little boy standing only a few feet from the battle. A wave of panic swept over him. He had no idea how a child had ended up in the reserve, but he knew the boy was in imminent danger. Without hesitation, Ronan pressed down on the pedal, speeding toward the child. As he approached, the second lion managed to free himself from Mufasa's hold and retreated, limping away as Mufasa roared and turned his focus back to the boy. Ronan cared deeply for Mufasa, but if the lion had harmed the child, it would have brought serious repercussions for the reserve. What happened next, however, nearly caused Ronan to lose control of the jeep in disbelief. The giant lion lay down beside the child, positioning himself protectively around the boy and scanning the area for any further threats. Ronan realized that what he had just witnessed was not a fight over territory or food. Mufasa had defended the boy, risking himself to fend off the other lion. Ronan's mind drifted back to the day he had discovered Mufasa, a helpless cub, pressed close to his deceased mother's side. He wondered if Mufasa had sensed something familiar in the crying child. Whatever the reason, Ronan was astounded by what he had just witnessed. He hoped his trust in Mufasa was well placed, as he needed to get the child off the road and find out how he had ended up there. But if Mufasa wouldn't allow him near the boy, Ronan wasn't sure what he would do. Carefully, he cut the jeep's engine and slowly opened the door. Among all the rangers at the reserve, Ronan was the one Mufasa trusted most. He could spend hours tracking and observing the lion without ever disturbing him. Mufasa always sensed his presence, but it was as if he remembered being saved by Ronan, which seemed to give him a special connection with the young ranger. Now, Ronan could only hope that trust would work in his favor. As Ronan cautiously stepped out of the jeep, Mufasa watched his approach with calm, making no hurried movements. The great lion looked him over, almost as though evaluating whether Ronan could be trusted with the child. Then, after a long, leisurely stretch, Mufasa rose and strolled off. Ronan waited patiently, relieved he had passed the silent test and didn't rush forward. When the lion had moved a safe distance away, he gently lifted the boy into his arms, with Mufasa still nearby. The child was calm at first, but as the lion disappeared from sight, he began to cry again. Holding the boy close, Ronan carefully drove back to the office, his mind racing with questions about why the child had been left on that road in the first place. Ronan was still reeling from the shock of Mufasa's incredible actions. The most direct way to get answers about the boy's appearance was to review the CCTV footage near the reserve's boundary. What he saw, however, left him heartbroken. The footage revealed a worn, old car parked just outside the boundary. Squinting at the screen, Ronan made out a young man behind the wheel. Moments later, a young woman stepped out of the car, cradling a child in her arms. She looked around cautiously, as if searching for something, and then appeared to spot a weak spot in the fence. After several tries, she managed to slip through with the boy and set him down on the dirt path where Ronan had found him. He watched as she gently kissed the child on the forehead before returning to the car, leaving him behind. The camera captured the little boy searching for his parents, but they had already disappeared. The scene left Ronan more perplexed than ever. The kiss had been tender, almost filled with love, suggesting the woman felt she had no other choice. But why would she abandon him here, where he could be in serious danger? Did she think the security cameras would be monitored constantly, ensuring the child would be rescued immediately? Or did she hope that a ranger would stumble upon him quickly? Ronan realized he might never fully understand the woman's reasons. Nonetheless, he was determined to find the boy's family, though something in his heart hinted that they were long gone. After reviewing the footage, Ronan prepared a meal for the little boy. The child seemed calmer now, so the ranger decided it was the right moment to try gathering some information before contacting the authorities. However, all the boy could give him was his name, Leo. With no other choice, Ronan started making the necessary difficult phone calls. As he spoke to the authorities, he noticed Leo cautiously nibbling at his food, and a thought struck him. Years ago, he had rescued Mufasa as a helpless cub after his mother's death, and now he'd witnessed that same lion protecting a child who'd been abandoned by his own parents. It felt like life had come full circle in an unexpected way. But this time, unlike with Mufasa, there would be no one to watch over the child once he left Ronan's care. Ronan understood that only dire circumstances could have driven Leo's parents to abandon him. He knew that some villagers near the reserve lived in poverty, and raising a child could be a costly struggle. Remembering the footage of the young woman's heartbreak and Leo searching for his parents, Ronan felt a deep sadness about what lay ahead for the boy once he left the reserve. When the authorities arrived, Leo was happily watching videos on Ronan's phone after finishing his meal. The little boy brightened up, repeatedly pointing outside and saying, "Lion," while imitating a roar. Ronan couldn't help but laugh at his enthusiasm. Curious about Leo's future, he asked the authorities what would happen next. They explained that if no relatives were found, Leo would be placed in an orphanage in the hopes of finding an adoptive family. The idea of so much change and uncertainty for someone so young felt overwhelming, and Ronan couldn't bear to think how it would affect him. Almost instinctively, before fully considering his decision, Ronan volunteered to care for the child while the authorities continued searching for his family. It was a bold and spontaneous choice. After all, he had no experience with children. Yet, in his heart, he felt the same pull he'd felt years ago when he had first saved Mufasa. Just a few days later, Ronan received disappointing news. Leo's family couldn't be located, and he would have to go to an orphanage. Ronan looked at the boy with a heavy heart. In such a short time, Leo had settled in remarkably well. Only the day before, Ronan had taken him for a ride to see the lions, and Leo had squealed with joy at the sight of playful cubs. Witnessing the reserve, a place so dear to him through Leo's innocent wonder, felt truly magical. Ronan realized that one day Leo would inevitably ask why he had been abandoned. Although no one could ever give him a definitive answer, there would be someone who could assure him of his parents' love. Someone who could recount the incredible story of a brave lion that had protected him. That person would be Ronan. In that moment, the ranger made his decision. There would be no orphanage for Leo. He would adopt the boy himself. The following months were challenging, with Ronan navigating the lengthy adoption process to officially become Leo's legal guardian. But at last, when everything was finalized, the new father and son set out to celebrate with a drive to see the lions. As the late evening sun cast a warm glow over the reserve, They came upon Mufasa resting not far from the very spot where Leo had first been found. As the jeep slowed, Mufasa looked up lazily, meeting the gaze of the little boy peering at him through the window. With a calm expression, Mufasa regarded the man who had rescued not only him, but now this child as well. Ronan was filled with anticipation, eager to one day share Mufasa's story with his son when he was old enough to understand. Ronan's life might have seemed unconventional, with a rescued lion and an adopted child as his family, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. Did you enjoy this story? How would you have acted in Ronan's place? Would you have adopted the child or taken him to the orphanage? Have you ever seen a lion up close? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please subscribe and leave a like. Remember, love always takes courage. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Have a wonderful day.